I never thought I'd find myself saying this, but here I am, telling you that my dog did something my boyfriend couldn't do in 5 years of being together. It sounds crazy, right? You might be thinking, what could a dog possibly do that a human couldn't? Well, buckle up because this is one of those stories that will make you rethink everything about relationships, loyalty, and the unconditional love that our pets give us. For 5 long years, my boyfriend and I were in a relationship where I felt stuck, constantly wondering if things would ever change. I loved him, of course, but there was always something missing, a little spark that just never seemed to ignite. We talked about everything under the sun, our future, our dreams, our plans. But when it came to really making things happen, it felt like we were stuck in neutral. He had all the potential, all the words, but when it came time to act or show me what he truly cared about, I was always left waiting. Then, one day, everything changed. It wasn't a big event or some grand gesture. It was a simple moment, a small action from my dog, of all things, that had me feeling something I hadn't in a long time. A feeling I had been craving in my relationship but couldn't quite put my finger on. And trust me, when it happened, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't believe it. I remember the moment so clearly. I had just gotten home after a long day, feeling frustrated, exhausted, and a little down. My boyfriend was on the couch as usual, watching TV. We exchanged a few words, but nothing that made me feel seen, heard, or understood. Meanwhile, my dog, my loyal little buddy, was bouncing around, wagging his tail like nothing else mattered. It was like he could sense exactly what I needed at that moment. And then, without thinking, he did something that left me in awe. What my dog did next was something my boyfriend and I had talked about for months, but never actually followed through on. It was the kind of gesture that speaks louder than words, one that made me realize just how much I was settling for in my relationship. It's funny how sometimes the simplest moments with our pets can put everything into perspective. Now, I'm not here to bash my boyfriend or say that our relationship wasn't meaningful. But when you've been waiting for someone to show you that they truly care, and you find that same feeling from a pet who can't even speak, it really makes you question things. Was I asking too much, or was I just not getting the effort I deserved? What happened next changed everything. But before I tell you how this story unfolds, let me ask you this. Have you ever had a moment where something unexpected made you rethink everything? Stay tuned to find out how this small yet powerful act from my dog led me to a decision I never thought I'd make. The days leading up to that moment with my dog had been rough. I didn't want to admit it at first, but I felt like something in my relationship was off. When we first got together, everything seemed perfect. We were a team, always on the same page, laughing about stupid things, making plans for the future. But over time, I started to feel like I was carrying the weight of the relationship on my own. There was this constant sense of imbalance, like I was giving everything and not getting the same in return. I tried to talk to him about it a few times, but every conversation ended the same way: empty promises and vague reassurances. I love him, I really do, but there was always this unspoken expectation that I would be patient, that things would get better on their own. After all, we had history, and wasn't that enough? But as the months passed, I realized that waiting for change had become exhausting. I was starting to wonder if he even noticed how hard I was trying. And that's when I found myself turning more and more to my dog. I've had him for a couple of years now, this goofy, lovable ball of fur who always seems to know when something's wrong. He's not like other pets. When I'm upset, he'll climb into my lap, rest his head on my chest, and just stay there, not asking anything of me, just offering comfort. But that day, when I walked into the house feeling drained and empty, he did something that made my heart skip a beat. It wasn't just a cuddle or a wagging tail. It was the kind of gesture that said, I see you and I'm here for you. The irony hit me like a slap in the face. My dog, who couldn't even talk, was doing more for me than my boyfriend had in months. I couldn't help but wonder, what was I really waiting for? Did I deserve to feel this way for much longer? But I was scared to face the reality of it all. What if I was overreacting? What if things could change? Or maybe, just maybe, I had been holding on to a version of the relationship that no longer existed. The more I thought about that moment with my dog, the more I realized how much I had been ignoring. It wasn't just the little things my boyfriend had failed to do, it was the larger pattern, the emotional distance that had been creeping in over time. I found myself growing resentful, silently tallying up all the times I had given and not received. It wasn't that he was a bad person. He was kind, funny, and ambitious. But somewhere along the way, we had stopped being partners. Instead, I felt like I was playing a role, a caretaker, a planner, a fixer. And for the first time, I felt like I was losing myself in the process. I had spent so much time trying to make him see the effort I was putting in. But the more I tried, the more distant he became. He was busy with work, with his own interests, with his friends. It always felt like I was the one who had to adjust, who had to make the compromises. Whenever I tried to bring up my feelings, he would tell me he was working on it. But that was the problem. It was always about something he was working on, never something he had done. That evening, after my dog had done what he did, I sat on the couch, just staring at the wall, trying to make sense of everything. I had never been a confrontational person, but something had shifted inside me. I realized how much of my energy had been spent on trying to salvage something that might have already been gone. The realization stung, and I felt a wave of anger and disappointment. How had I let it go on this long without doing something about it? The funny thing was, I never expected my dog to be the one to make me see all of this. But in that moment, when I was completely overwhelmed by the weight of my thoughts, my dog, who had no idea what was going on in my head, had just given me exactly what I needed, a reminder of what unconditional love really felt like. He wasn't trying to fix anything. He wasn't making empty promises or excuses. He was just there, offering his love in the purest way possible. And then there was the guilt, the nagging feeling that maybe I was being too harsh on my boyfriend. Maybe I was expecting too much. After all, he wasn't a mind reader. He had his own struggles, too. We all have our flaws, right? But the more I wrestled with the guilt, the more I realized that I had been trying to make it work for both of us. While he was only trying to make it work for himself, he was still the same person I fell in love with. But I had changed. I had grown. And maybe that's where the disconnect started. I couldn't keep waiting for him to catch up. It's strange how things can be right in front of you for so long, and yet you don't really see them until a moment like this. I wanted to believe that things could get better, that if we both worked at it, we could find our way back to the way we were. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the longer I waited, the more of myself I would lose in the process. And then I thought about what my dog had given me. It wasn't about fixing things. It was about feeling seen, feeling valued. And in that moment, I knew I deserved that too. But here's where the problem really started. I wasn't sure how to move forward. Should I confront my boyfriend about everything I was feeling? Or should I just walk away from something that had once meant the world to me? It felt like no matter what choice I made, something valuable would be lost. The only thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't keep living like this, pretending everything was okay, when I wasn't even sure what okay meant anymore. The more I sat with my thoughts, the more I began to question everything. How had I let it get this far? How had I let myself become so invisible in my own relationship? The truth was, I was terrified. terrified of facing the reality that maybe the person I had built my life around wasn't capable of giving me what I needed. I loved him, but love alone couldn't fix everything. I needed something more. I needed to feel like I mattered, like my happiness was just as important as his. But I wasn't ready to face that, not yet. Part of me still clung to the hope that it wasn't too late to turn things around, that maybe, just maybe, my boyfriend would suddenly wake up and realize how much I was struggling, that he would pull through and do the things he had promised to do, things that would show me that I wasn't just another part of his routine. I thought about confronting him, laying everything out on the table, but every time I tried, the words got caught in my throat. It felt like a betrayal, like admitting that I had lost faith in him. But I couldn't ignore how different I felt now, how much more alive and seen I felt in the presence of my dog than I ever did in our relationship. That evening, when I returned home after another long day, the tension was already thick in the air. My boyfriend was sitting on the couch, just as he always was, barely acknowledging my presence. It wasn't that he was rude or dismissive, he was just absent. We hadn't had a real conversation in days, and even when we did talk, it was surface level stuff. No, how was your day? Or, is everything okay? It was like we were two strangers passing through the same space, just waiting for something to happen. My dog, however, didn't miss a beat. As soon as I stepped through the door, he was there, tail wagging, eyes full of excitement, as if I was the most important person in the world. And that small act of love hit me harder than I expected. My heart swelled with emotion, and in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: unconditional acceptance. It was so simple, so pure, but it made me realize just how much I had been craving that in my relationship. I walked into the living room and sat down next to my boyfriend, my dog curled up beside me. The silence between us was deafening. I wanted to speak, to say something, but I didn't know where to start. Every time I opened my mouth, the words felt heavy, as though they were suffocating me. I looked at him, waiting for him to look at me, to ask if something was wrong. But he didn't. He just kept watching TV, unaware, or maybe just not willing to engage. The truth hit me like a slap. I had been waiting for this moment, waiting for a sign, for him to make the first move. But he wasn't going to. He never was. And suddenly I realized that the weight I had been carrying wasn't just on my shoulders. It was because I had been letting him carry none of it. I had been waiting for him to change, to become something he wasn't, while I had been losing pieces of myself along the way. I stood up abruptly, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to do something. But what? Could I keep going like this? Could I live another day in this emotional limbo, pretending everything was fine? Or was it finally time to face the truth and walk away? As I turned to leave the room, my dog nudged my leg, as if to remind me that I wasn't alone in this. He was there, his warm presence grounding me, making me realize that I deserved more. But the question still lingered. Was I ready to make the hardest decision of my life, or was I too scared to let go of what we once had? My pulse raced as I made my way to the door, unsure if I was about to change everything or stay in the same cycle of uncertainty. The tension was unbearable. Every part of me screamed for clarity, but the silence in the room was the loudest voice of all. As I stood there, frozen at the doorway, my mind raced. My dog, sensing the shift in the energy, sat quietly beside me, his soft eyes watching me intently. I hadn't noticed how much time had passed until I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I turned around, half expecting to see my boyfriend finally coming to talk, to ask what was wrong. But instead, he was holding his phone, looking more distracted than ever. "Hey, I've got to take this," he said, walking away without even acknowledging the tension that hung in the air. His words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just the lack of a conversation, it was the complete disregard for what was happening between us. He was so absorbed in his phone call that he didn't even notice the look on my face, the way I was holding back tears. I turned to my dog again, my heart sinking. I had been waiting for him to notice, to ask, to care. But now I was beginning to see the truth more clearly than ever before. It wasn't just about feeling unseen, it was about feeling completely invisible in my own life. My boyfriend was always busy, always distracted, always somewhere else. And now, standing there alone, I realized that I had been waiting for him to change, but he was never going to. That's when the phone call ended, and in the silence that followed, he casually walked over to me, dropped his phone on the couch, and without looking at me, said, "I think we need a break. Things just haven't been the same for a while." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at him, unable to comprehend what I had just heard. A break? Was this the moment I had been waiting for? Was this how it ended? The words hung in the air between us like a thick fog. A break? After everything, this was his solution? I felt my chest tighten, a wave of disbelief washing over me. It wasn't just the shock of what he'd said, it was the timing, the way he had said it, like it was just another part of his daily routine. He wasn't looking at me, his eyes focused somewhere far away, as if he had already made up his mind, and the conversation was nothing more than a formality. It was the final confirmation I needed. He had already emotionally checked out. I didn't know what to say at first. Everything inside me screamed to yell, to demand answers, to make him understand how much he had hurt me. But I stood there, paralyzed, trying to process the coldness in his words. A break? Was that really how he saw us? How he saw me? "You're serious?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. The question wasn't even a question. It was more of a statement, a desperate attempt to make sense of everything. He glanced at me for a moment, his face unreadable. "Yeah," he said, his tone flat. "We've been distant for a while now. I think we both need some time apart to figure things out. I'm just being honest." The honesty of it hit me like a ton of bricks. He wasn't even upset. He wasn't apologizing. It wasn't even hard for him to say. For a moment, I was numb. I had spent so much time trying to save something that, in the end, didn't seem worth saving. But just as I was about to let out the breath I had been holding, to walk away and finally make the decision I had been avoiding for so long, something unexpected happened. From the corner of my eye, I saw my dog get up from his spot on the floor. Without a sound, he trotted over to me, his tail wagging gently, and sat at my feet. He looked up at me with those big, trusting eyes, his presence a quiet reminder of the unconditional love I had been craving. As I knelt down to pet him, something inside me shifted. The anger, the frustration, the confusion, all of it seemed to fade into the background. It wasn't just about my boyfriend anymore. It was about me, my happiness, and what I deserved. I looked back up at my boyfriend, who was still standing there, waiting for some kind of reaction, some kind of acknowledgement of what he'd said. I could feel the weight of the moment, but I knew deep down that I couldn't let this define me. I couldn't let his indifference be the reason I stayed in a relationship that no longer served me. "I think you're right," I said, surprising myself with how calm my voice sounded. "Maybe we do need a break." He blinked, clearly not expecting me to agree. But before he could say anything else, I added, "But I'm not sure I want to come back." His face faltered for just a second, but he quickly masked it with a shrug. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I continued, taking a deep breath, "that I've been carrying this relationship for so long, waiting for you to notice, to care, to do something. But you haven't, and I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired of pretending everything is fine when it's not. You want a break? fine, but I'm done. I need to find myself again. I need to stop losing pieces of me just to keep this going. For the first time in what felt like ages, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't regret or sadness. It was surprise, maybe even disbelief. But I didn't care. It was too late for that. As I grabbed my bag, preparing to leave the room, I heard him call after me, his voice shaky. Are you sure? You're really just going to walk away like this? I paused for a moment, glancing back at him, but then I realized something. I wasn't walking away from him. I was walking toward myself. And then, just as I reached the door, I heard something else, a noise I hadn't expected. The sound of my dog, who had been quietly sitting at my feet, now barking loudly. It was a strange bark, urgent, insistent. I turned around, confused, just in time to see him dart toward the door, his tail wagging furiously. I opened the door, still unsure what was happening, but then I saw it. There, standing in the doorway, was a small envelope, addressed to me, in handwriting I didn't recognize. I took a step forward, heart racing. The plot had already thickened enough. But this was a twist I hadn't seen coming. What was in that envelope? And who had left it there? My thoughts spun, the questions racing through my mind as I reached for it, completely unaware that this moment would change everything. I looked back at my boyfriend, who was still standing there, stunned by my words. I'm leaving, I said, my voice steady. This isn't what I want anymore. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't even say a word as I walked out the door, my dog happily following at my side. As I stepped into the fresh air, I felt lighter. The weight I had been carrying for so long had finally been lifted. The uncertainty had melted away. It wasn't the end of my story, but the beginning of something new. Sometimes it takes losing something to realize what you truly need, and for the first time in years, I was finally on the path to finding myself again.